The narcissist's worst nightmare. What happens when an empath takes control?
There's a power shift happening. Quiet, invisible, but unstoppable. For years, narcissists have written the script, controlling the narrative with expertly crafted manipulations, gaslighting you into questioning your own reality, dominating every conversation until you felt yourself disappearing. They built empires on your confusion and thrived on your self-doubt. But what happens when the empath, once the silent sufferer, wakes up? What happens when that same heart, so attuned to others' pain, stops shrinking in the face of intimidation and instead stands tall in its own truth? Imagine that moment when you not only survive their games, but seize control of the story. The empath and the narcissist seem like opposites, but they're drawn together like magnets, two forces circling each other in an endless dance. One seeks control, using every tactic at their disposal to bend you to their will. The other seeks connection, longing for authenticity in a world that prizes power over compassion. One hides their wounds behind a fortress of ego and arrogance. The other wears their heart on their sleeve, feeling everything with an intensity that can both wound and heal. But this dynamic isn't a gentle pull, it's a battlefield hidden in plain sight. While the narcissist launches loud psychological assaults, love bombing, silent treatments, explosive tirades, the empath wages a subtler, deeper war, the battle of internal growth. You learn to recognize the patterns, to feel the tremor beneath the surface, and to understand that their chaos is not a reflection of your worth. As you evolve, the tables begin to turn. You no longer play by their rules. You stop defending yourself against accusations that make no sense. You stop chasing approval that was never yours to earn. Instead, you observe their attempts to provoke you, and you choose how you'll respond calmly, clearly, without ever raising your voice. In that moment, the empath transforms from prey into power. You're no longer trapped on their battlefield, fighting their battles. You've created a sanctuary within yourself, where your peace is inviolable and your clarity is impenetrable. And as you walk away from their illusions, unbroken and reborn, their empire begins to crumble silently, invisibly and entirely at your feet. The transformation of an empath doesn't come with fire and noise. It doesn't begin with arguments, screaming, or emotional outbursts. It doesn't happen all at once in a dramatic moment. Instead, it starts quietly, softly, and almost silently, with a moment of awareness. It's not about confrontation at first. It begins with a deep, honest pause, a quiet reflection that rises from within. It's the soft realization that comes when they sit alone, tired, wondering, why do I always feel so drained when I'm around this person? It's when they start recognizing that the exhaustion isn't just physical, it's emotional, mental, and spiritual. They begin to notice things they once brushed aside. They see how guilt always follows whenever they try to say no. They notice how conversations leave them confused, second-guessing what was said, wondering what they did wrong. They recognize how often they carry the emotional weight of others without even being asked. And slowly it becomes clear, this isn't normal. This isn't healthy. They stop blaming themselves for being too emotional or too sensitive. Instead of trying to be less of themselves, they begin to understand that their sensitivity is not the problem. It's their greatest strength. It's not about being weak. It's about being deeply attuned. But now, they realize that this gift has been used against them, and they stop allowing that to happen. They stop over-explaining their thoughts, their actions, their boundaries. They understand that there's no point in giving long explanations to someone who never truly listens, who only hears what they can twist for their own gain. They stop apologizing for every small thing, especially things that were never their fault in the first place, like someone else's anger, or someone else's disappointment, or emotions they were taught to carry even when they weren't theirs to hold. They stop thinking that it's their job to fix everything. They look at the chaos and dysfunction, and for the first time say, "This isn't mine." That single moment where they give themselves permission to let go is the start of something powerful. That shift, quiet and steady, marks the beginning of the end of the narcissist's grip over them. Because when clarity enters the room, confusion starts to leave. And when someone becomes aware of the game, they stop playing it. The empath stops asking, "How can I be what they need me to be?" and starts asking, "What do I need to be for myself?" That one question changes everything. Because when you shift the focus away from the narcissist and back onto yourself, you begin to take your power back. And once your eyes are open, you can't close them again. Once you've seen the pattern, you can't pretend it's not there. You start noticing every time they guilt you, every time they gaslight you, every time they make you doubt your own reality. And with that awareness, you begin to take action. The most powerful word in this transformation? No. It's small, it's simple, but it's mighty. And when the empath finally begins to say it, clearly, firmly, without feeling bad, the narcissist's control starts to slip. Because their control was never about strength. It was built on your confusion, your guilt, and your willingness to always bend. But now that cycle is breaking. You don't need to raise your voice. You don't need to fight. Your no becomes a boundary, a wall they can no longer cross. And those boundaries aren't just in the words you speak. They live in your energy. They appear in how you carry yourself, in how you walk away from arguments that go nowhere, in how you stop explaining things to people who have no interest in understanding, in how you remain calm when they give you the silent treatment, no longer feeling the need to chase after their approval. Boundaries are no longer something you fear. They are something you cherish. They're not about pushing people away. They're about protecting your peace. They are daily reminders of your worth. When you begin to value your emotional and mental well-being more than the illusion of a connection that was built on manipulation, you begin to change the entire dynamic. You stop feeding the narcissist, the very thing they relied on, your willingness to betray yourself to make them comfortable. You stop giving away pieces of yourself just to keep the peace. And slowly, their power starts to dry up. Because narcissists feed off self-abandonment. That's what fuels their behavior. Your willingness to put yourself last. But once you stop doing that, once you begin choosing yourself, not out of revenge, not out of anger, but out of love and respect for your own soul, the entire foundation of their control begins to collapse. And it doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't need to. It's quiet. It's steady. It's a decision that lives in your daily choices. You no longer say yes when you mean no. You stop explaining your boundaries. You start protecting your peace with actions, not arguments. You realize, this is where I end, and you begin. Your emotions, your chaos, your need to control. I don't have to carry that anymore. That moment is more than a boundary. It's freedom. It's the beginning of a new life, one where you no longer have to live in emotional survival mode, where your sensitivity is your strength. Your clarity is your shield, and your peace is your priority. And that's what the narcissist never expected. That you'd grow, that you'd awaken, that you'd walk away, not in rage, but in truth. That you'd stop giving them access to the most sacred parts of you. And that right there is the beginning of your healing. The narcissist power comes from your reaction, your shock when they cross a line, your pain when they twist your words, your frantic scramble to make sense of their chaos. They thrive on drama, on attention, on emotional hurricanes that leave you breathless. But what happens when you stop reacting and instead respond with a calm, detached clarity? Suddenly, the script falls apart. The narcissist looks for the familiar spark, the flare of outrage, the plea for understanding, the tearful apology, and finds nothing. Their usual tactics bounce off you like rain off a stone. Confusion flickers in their eyes. They escalate, ramping up the tension, throwing more blame, more accusations, more guilt. But still nothing works, because you've accessed something rare, emotional sovereignty. You're not cold, you're not numbed, you're simply in control of your own inner world. You feel what you feel, but you no longer let those feelings dictate your every move. This is where empathy meets discipline, where you understand another's pain without letting it drown you, where love doesn't demand self-destruction, and compassion doesn't come at the cost of your own well-being. Once you see through the narcissist's mask, their games lose all intrigue. You recognize the pattern so clearly that the next moves become predictable and boring. That's when you pull out the most powerful tools in your arsenal. You'll become a gray rock, unreactive, uninteresting, unreadable. You offer no drama, no fuel for their fire. They search for an opening and find only stillness. You shift to low or no contact, cutting off the flow of your emotional energy into their supply chain. Without your empathy to siphon, they wither. You practice energetic escape, mentally stepping back even if you can't physically walk away yet. You reclaim your mental space, your focus, your peace. This is psychological warfare without a single attack. You don't lash out, you don't expose, you simply choose silence. And that silence is deafening to someone who survives on chaos and conflict. In the echo of your stillness, their empire unravels because the only way they know how to win is to keep you playing their game. And when you refuse to play, they lose. When the narcissist realizes they no longer control your emotions, your attention, or your sense of reality, panic sets in. You may notice a sudden rush of compliments and grand gestures, love bombing meant to pull you back into their orbit. When that fails, they'll try guilt trips, reminding you of every sacrifice they made, as if your freedom is their debt. When shame doesn't work, they'll launch smear campaigns, whispering half-truths and lies to anyone who will listen. If even that falls flat, they'll offer fake apologies, hollow words devoid of responsibility, hoping you'll take the bait. And when all else fails, they'll threaten abandonment, painting a picture of devastation they think will scare you into compliance. But none of it lands. You've changed frequencies. You're no longer the emotional caretaker. You've stepped back and become the observer, unmoved by their theatrics, untouched by their manipulations. And for the narcissist, that is the ultimate terror, because if they can't control you, they can't define themselves. Your journey doesn't end with escape. It deepens into transformation. You begin to trust your intuition again, that quiet inner voice you once silenced. You rebuild your self-worth, brick by brick, on firm ground rather than shifting sand. You stop attracting toxic relationships because you no longer signal availability to be used. You make decisions based on discernment, not on guilt or fear. And as your healing becomes your strength, you naturally become a guide, leading others out of similar darkness. In that evolution from wounded to warrior, you become an example of true sovereignty. And for the narcissist, that is their deepest loss. The person they once fed on is now completely out of reach, emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically. A healed empath no longer lives to soothe everyone else's storms. They no longer rush in to fix, to save, to be the emotional cushion for chaos they didn't cause. That old role, the emotional caretaker, the peacekeeper, at the cost of their own peace, is gone, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom, because now they understand that empathy does not mean self-erasure, that to truly care for others, they must first honor themselves. They've become the protector of their own energy. Every yes is intentional, every boundary is sacred, and where once there was a compulsion to over-explain, to defend, to be understood, they've chosen silence, clarity, and stillness. They are not cold, they are clear. They've learned that clarity can feel like cruelty to those who benefited from their confusion. They are not aggressive, they are aligned. Aligned with their truth, aligned with their values, aligned with their purpose, which no longer includes serving as emotional fuel for someone else's dysfunction. They do not seek revenge, they seek freedom. And in that pursuit, they become untouchable. Because true power doesn't come from controlling others, it comes from mastering yourself. This new energy, their calm, their presence, their refusal to be reactive, is no longer food for the narcissist. It is fire. A fire that doesn't burn to destroy, but burns away illusion. A fire that lights their path forward, that keeps them warm in their own self-respect, and that makes them impossible to manipulate. From the narcissist's perspective, this is pure chaos. The rules have changed. The game no longer works. The empath, once predictable, once pliable, now moves in silence, in peace, in grounded power. They no longer feel guilt for stepping away. They no longer flinch at blame or shame. They no longer hand out emotional access like it's owed. They aren't chasing validation. They've stopped auditioning for love that demands their silence. They've stopped chasing apologies that never come. And in that stillness, they've become deeply self-sourced, rooted in their own truth, not anyone else's approval. The narcissist may try to hoover, reach back out with half-hearted promises, false vulnerability, or manipulative nostalgia. They'll say things like, "You've changed," hoping it will feel like a wound. But the empath has changed, and that's the point. They've outgrown the old story. The story where they were always the fixer, the forgiver, the one who stayed. Now they've reclaimed the pen. And the new story isn't about pain. It's about power. It's about choosing peace, even if it means walking alone. It's about trusting their intuition, setting boundaries, and honoring the journey it took to get here. This is no longer survival. This is sovereignty. And from the narcissist's point of view, that evolution, that freedom, that silence, is the loudest goodbye they'll ever hear. When an empath takes control, it's not with noise or spectacle. It's not about loud confrontations or dramatic showdowns. It's not about revenge or proving someone wrong. Instead, it's a quiet revolution that happens deep within. It's about reclaiming your emotional space, carving out boundaries where none existed before. It's about rewriting the patterns that kept you trapped in cycles of confusion and pain. It's about choosing peace over chaos, choosing yourself over their demands. And then, it's about walking away. Walking away without hesitation, without looking back, without the need for explanations or apologies. That simple act, stepping fully into your power and peace, is the narcissist's worst nightmare. Not because you destroy them or expose their lies, but because you make them irrelevant. In your world, they no longer hold any power. They are not gods to worship, nor monsters to fear. They become nothing more than a closed chapter, a story you've finished reading. If you've ever walked away from a narcissist, or if you're on the path of reclaiming your power right now, know this: you are not alone. Drop a comment below to share your journey. Connect with others who understand this path of healing and strength. Subscribe for more deep dives into healing, emotional freedom, and what it truly means to be an empowered empath. This is your journey. Own it fully, live it freely, and never give your light to someone who only knows how to live in shadow.